Do you feel like you're on a constant hamster wheel trying to figure out why don't people care about our church? Are you doing events and you're really just seeing the same people at the same event over and over again? Are you seeing some of the same people that come kind of every once in a while and then they leave? And yeah, you do reach new people, but there should be, or at least you feel there should be, a lot more people taking action. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I'm going to do a little bit something different. I'm going to share with you something that's on my heart. And we were running through this on mic check. We're testing, we're still improving the audio setup here, and looks like everything's working. If it's not, by all means, leave me a comment. But as we were testing something, I really started going on a tirade. I wish we were recording it. I would say a righteous tirade. Let me share with you, because some people, let me start with this, because some people are going to see a title like this, aligning church communications to align with church needs and desires, and they'll say, oh, the church shouldn't align with church needs and desires, or excuse me, community needs and desires. The community needs to align with the church desire. First of all, who said it was the church bending the knee to the community? No one ever said that. And quite frankly, I'm tired. I am so tired of people seeing work that we're doing, seeing work that other organizations like us are doing to try to bring the church out from beyond the four walls, using the internet, using marketing, using promotional advertising, using communications. And they sit there and say, what are you doing? Just preach the gospel. Bro, do you think we're not preaching the gospel? Here's what I want. I want more people, when the gospel is preached, I want more people to hear it. I want the gospel to expand past the four walls and meet people where they are. And guess what? If you're standing on a street preaching the gospel, more power to you. What I know is that for every person that's going to pass you and actually listen to you actively to hear the gospel, another person is going to walk by ignoring you, head down, face in the phone. I know when they are driving past your church, driving past the $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 digital LED sign, that they are not going to see it even while they're driving. Why? Because they got their phone out, checking Facebook, reading texts, calling people. They are not paying attention to traditional advertising promotional efforts. Okay, your flyers are going in the trash. Your direct mailers are going in the recycle bin. And that's why, even though they can work, they work at a 0.01%, not 1%. 0.01%. And that's why, to get one person to come to church from your direct mailer, to get one person to come to church from your sign, you've got to send out 10,000 mailers. You've got to have 100,000 people drive past your sign. And what me and other folks in our industry are doing is trying to bring the church into the next season to reach new people. Okay? We had traditional church, and then Martin Luther came and said, let's do it in our language, right? We had people that only got the Bible in the church building, and then the printing press came and said, let's make it so everyone can have a Bible in their home. And then we had the invention of radio and TV, broadcasting, and someone said, Billy Graham, he definitely was is at the pinnacle of it, said, why should it stay in the walls, only accessible geographically? Let's get the gospel out in front of people. Yes, let's have our crusades. Yes, let's have our revivals. Yes, let's have our events and bring people in, but why not record it and broadcast it out? Are you going to say Billy Graham did not preach the gospel simply because he recorded it and then broadcasted it out, because he had tapes that you could watch on demand, because you could tune in live to watch it? No, you can market, you can promote, you can advertise while preaching the gospel in the name of the gospel, because you want people to hear it. And if all you do is preach the gospel, congratulations, you're preaching the gospel to the choir. And when you say, just preach the gospel, and someone in your church says, that person needs to hear the gospel, and they go in and say, hey, I want you to come to my church, it's great. I think you'd be a good fit. I know you're on rocky, your life is rocking, right? I know your marriage isn't doing too good. I know you're coming in a little bit more straggly. I know you told me this about yourself and you want to get better at it. I know the way to get better at it. I want to invite you to my church. And we just preach the gospel. So what's going to happen is that person is going to say, what church is that? And they're going to go online. And they're going to see very generic information. And guess what? A generic looking church looks like a generic church, which means I can expect it to be like any other church I've been to, I've seen, or I've even judged and thought about and made assumptions about. And so even though you're preaching the gospel, because you're not effectively promoting what the gospel does, what the benefit, the life-changing cause of the gospel is, because you're not sharing that, promoting it, marketing it, advertising it, getting the word out, spreading the word, because you're not doing that, you are just preaching the gospel. And if that's what you want to do, I call it selfishness, then more power to you. But get out of our way for us who want to reach the people in the community, for us that want to reach people who have never been reached before, because other churches in the area who are just preaching the gospel are not reaching them. And so we're going to do what it takes to communicate the church to the people, to communicate Christ's love to the people, to communicate the call to repent, the call to come back to your Creator, the call to live for a greater purpose than yourself, the call to perfect peace, perfect hope, perfect purpose. And we're going to do whatever it takes to get to those people. So if you're going to sit here and say, oh, the church shouldn't be aligning their services and events to community needs, wrong. The community needs to bend the knee to Christ Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Amen. But the way that we can get them to recognize the power and glory and love of Christ is to bring the church to them. And where are they? They're online. Kids are spending 2 hours a day on Roblox. Used to be Minecraft, now it's Roblox. Okay, teens are spending 4 hours a day on social media. You think your door hanger is going to get someone to church? 1 in 10,000. But I know that we can run an Instagram ad that showcases the love of Christ and the power of what Christ can do in your life now. And we can get that one video for 7 cents in front of someone, which means, do the math, $7, 700 people, not just to get in front of them, but to get them to watch it. And then they recognize the power of Christ, and we can call them to take a next step to come back and return to their Creator and live in His glory and abundant hope and life. So we're going to do that. And if you're going to sit here and say, oh, just preach the gospel, we're just going to stay in, we're just going to do what we've always been doing, that's fine. Get out of our way. And so when I talk about aligning church communications with community needs and desires, I'm not talking about changing the church to appeal to the community. I'm talking about communicating in a way that helps them feel heard, helps them feel understood, and helps them see why they should pay attention enough to hear Jesus Christ and the gospel and what He has for them. The perfect gift of unmerited favor for them. But to do that, we need to meet them where they are. That doesn't mean accept them where they are. That doesn't mean don't call them to repent, but that means communicate in a way that they understand, feel understood, and that trust is connected. So you don't come across like a stranger preaching on the corner and I can just ignore you and I'll never have to see you again. But you're that coworker, you're that family member that I know I'm going to see, and over time I'm going to realize there is something different about this organization. There's something different about this church. There is something that, they don't know the word they're using is holy, but there's something different, unique about this church that they just seem to understand me. And if they understand me, they understand my needs. If they understand my needs, then maybe they can actually help me. And then when they go to church, they realize it's not the church changing lives, it's Jesus Christ through the church. So I want to make sure we're 100% clear on this. That when I talk about aligning church communications to meet community needs and desires, I'm not talking about the community needs money, so the church needs to become a fundraiser. The community needs more parents, so the church becomes an orphanage or a daycare. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the community is hurting because they're impoverished, because they're sick, because they're selfish, because they're addictive. So how do you communicate that Jesus Christ through your church is the answer to them? That's what we're talking about. I have a very special guest, Barbara. Thanks for hanging with me. This is the best known church show. Listen, if you haven't been able to tell already, I have an outrageous vision. I'm wearing it today. Outrageous vision. God gives us outrageous visions. If our God-given visions are not outrageous, I think it's a slap in the face. Time and time again, God has come down and done outrageous things. And I think if we're too realistic, we're leaning too much on our own strengths and we cannot boast and glorify God. So we're going to be outrageous in our vision today. Let's get into it with Barbara. First, let's hit the intro.
Welcome to the best known church show, where we show you how to 10x your reach with church marketing that will help you increase your impact, make more disciples, and become the cornerstone of your community again. This is for the leaders with an outrageous vision, because anything less would be an inaccurate reflection of our Creator. The ones who have unreasonable faith, because you know God works unreasonable miracles. And the ones who are relentless in the pursuit of your calling, because anything less would not make a good and faithful servant. If that's you, you're in the right place. Now, please welcome your host and guide on this journey to become the best known organization in your community, Justin Nava.
Hi. Thanks for sticking with me through that intro. I just had to get that off my chest, and I hope you hear the plea of the righteous plea in my heart that's trying to get out. That Paul, reading Romans this week, one of the things that was impressed upon me is how proud Paul is of his ministry. And it's not unmerited. Let's say it that way. It's not unwarranted. So I want to make sure, but that was also for me as much as it was for the haters out there, but also for the church communicators that might be watching this, that follow Barbara. I think it's going to be I pray it's a blessing for you. Today we're talking about aligning church communications with community needs and desires, meaning we know our community is hurting. How do we figure out how they're hurting? How do we figure out what they're desiring? Okay, and then how do we match the two to bring the gospel to them in a modern day 2024 century way? You know what I'm trying to say, 21st century way in 2024. Here we go. So I am interviewing Barbara. This is a pre-recorded interview, but I do that to make sure that we have enough time to get everything done. I don't think we had any edits in this, so it's going to play straight through. It's some fantastic stuff. We're going to talk about connecting with your community on a deeper level, so you don't have to feel like you're on a hamster wheel constantly trying to figure out how to get people to pay attention to your church. We're going to talk about event planning with a purpose, how to make your events stand out so it's not just another church event, but they feel like the event was made for them and they desire to go to the event where you'll love on them and preach the gospel, right? And then we're going to talk about crafting communications to bring it all together. So you've got their needs, the event or service to meet their needs. How do you communicate it so they pay attention to you? So they don't hear church service and think, it's just like what I grew up with grandma, I ain't doing that again. But they hear about your church service and they say, wow, that's something different. That's something I need. Tell me what to do next. Or I'm going to go ahead and take a next step. So we're going to get into that with Miss Barbara today. Before we do, if at any point you like what you hear, let us know on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening, leave a review. I hope this encourages y'all, and I'll be back at the end. God bless, and let's get in with Barbara. All right, with me, I've got Barbara. Tell anyone who hasn't heard of you, which I take responsibility if they have not heard of you. I feel like I'm always trying to tell people about yourself, Word Revolution, and what you're doing. I wouldn't be where I am without you. But if they don't know you, how would you describe you and your ministry and your business?
Thank you, Justin. I think at the essence, what I'm trying to do is reveal what's at the core of the people I encounter and the organizations I work with. And so my goal is to simply reveal that heartbeat, like what's inside. And so either a person having a conversation or as an agency when we do branding and even, in conferences and things like that. So, yeah.
And to what end? I think a lot of people falsely think that they are revealing themselves, but you help us go, even myself, you help us go deeper. What does that do for an organization like a church to dig deeper into that DNA?
Well, I think it does a few things. One is if you have clarity about who you are, then that clarity is contagious, right? Other people around you will also have clarity. So imagine not having a world of assumptions about where we're going, what we're doing, who we are, how we can serve people. The world of assumptions, in my opinion, is like a playground to the devil. And so when you bring clarity to these conversations, like we all know what we're designed to do and how we're designed to serve. And at an individual level, it's true as well. I see in scripture often how Jesus is so focused on our identity, how God is so focused on revealing our identity as sons and daughters to us. And so, like, the powerful aspect of awareness of who you are, I've seen it in scripture often. And I'm like, how can we not bring this to our branding and our communications and how we actually plan or strategize or create vision for our churches? So, yeah.
And one of the things that, as we were talking about, what we're going to talk about,
Yeah.
one thing that really struck me was a lot of folks, especially church communicators, which I know you have a special spot in your heart for. We
Yeah.
do this internal research. We research into human desires and what pain points are we solving and how do we position our church. But it oftentimes stops with the communication,
Yeah.
and it very rarely bleeds out into actual ministry. I shouldn't say actual ministry. Communication is ministry, but
Right.
it fails to bleed out into the youth pastorship or the general pastoralship and leadership of the elders. It kind of stops in the spoken word and visual representation, and it doesn't carry on into the ministry. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're talking about it because most of our audience here is in that church leader, pastor, director role. A lot of XPs watching this show, by the way. So I'm excited for them to hear this too. So I want to start with the most important thing. You talk about understanding the human desires of the people around us. And a lot of churches, I think, a lot of pastors, they're equipped and called to be a shepherd. And oftentimes that's where the understanding ends. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just what is. How do we further understand the desires of not just our congregation and their friends and family, but the community around us that God's called us to serve? How can we better understand what they need so we can speak to them in a relevant way?
Right. So, we're human. Let's start with that. Like, we're not serving this. I always refer to this faceless mass of people, right? So when we think of our audiences, and you don't have to use that term, when you simply think of the unchurched, the unreached, our neighbors, like it's this mass of people that we don't even have a face or a name for. And as long as it remains abstract, we will have a hard time communicating and engaging with them because it's just this abstract thing, right? So when you say neighbors, I mean, sure, you can think of your neighbor next door, immediately next door, but when it comes to a church, neighbors refers to a greater community that we sometimes don't know, Now, so we need to humanize the word audience. And I often say that we hear many people talking about knowing your audience. Well, let's take a step deeper and start loving them. So how about we start loving our audiences? Because that implies an emotion, it implies a connection, it implies a relationship of some sort. And so I can love my audience in a way that I can't just know them. I feel like it takes it, like you're describing, like, let's take it a step deeper. So let's humanize them first. That's step number one. We're talking about people. And if we're talking about people, there are key things that we know about humans that, first of all, are universal. So if you're on a mission trip to Asia, or if you go next door, or if you serve in New York, or if next month you're just traveling to South Africa, these things are universal. We all have key human desires. They will be the same 1,000 years ago, and they will be the same in 3,000 years from now if we're still here. So look at what humans have longed for, like what are the things that they're pursuing. And the reality is they're not pursuing a church service. They're pursuing other things. They're pursuing connection. They're pursuing belonging. They're pursuing hope. They're pursuing different things that sometimes we either neglect or don't really know how they play out when it comes to communications. But let's just start with that. So humanize your people, because they're people, they're not robots. And then let's figure out what kind of key human desires is my church specifically designed to answer, satisfy, and respond to. Yeah.
You're literally echoing, I believe, episode 56, where we talk about knowing who we say, know who you're best equipped to serve. And I love that you actually use the word design, because it's almost like God has not just equipped this entity, but designed it to specifically reach a specific group of people. And I think that's an important thing. I think a lot of pastors I hear, we just can't get the unchurched, dechurched, Gen X, Gen Z. We can't get them to care about us. We can't get them in the door. That's
Yeah.
still too abstract. And the way you're talking, tell me if I'm on the right track. I see like we need to flip it. So instead
Mhm.
of we can't get Gen Z into the church, we need to flip it to like we're having trouble getting the church to the Gen Z. And
Yeah.
it really turns the responsibility on us, which I'm always big into taking responsibility for everything. But it
Yeah.
also abstractifies it because if
Yes.
you can't get the church, you know who the church is, but if you don't know who Gen Z is, well, you got to figure out and
Yeah.
then figure out your way in. Am I on the right track there? Am
Yeah.
I understanding
100%.
correctly?
100%. Yeah. And
And
so, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the other thing you said was the same struggles we had 1,000 years ago are the same struggles we have today. They're just manifesting themselves differently. Uh, One of the stats we keep reading as leaders and that often get brought up to me in discovery calls is, this generation is the loneliest it's ever been. And
Yeah.
they never say this generation is lonely for the first time ever. No,
Right.
every generation has had
Big
loneliness
word.
problems. This one's just the loneliest, right?
Yeah.
So there are no new problems under the sun. Ecclesiastes, we like to pretend there are.
Yeah.
And so it's not so much how do we magically fix these problems in a way that's never been solved before, but
Right.
the way we go about it is a little bit different. Am I tracking on that too?
That is accurate. And so when you think of the just let's just bring one key human desire, the pursuit of truth. Yeah. So as humans, you're going to find that you can go to many different cultures, many different religions, even many different traditions and countries and languages. And everybody can understand the idea of pursuing the pursuit of truth, right? So what they may go to a different type of truth than the one that we know to be the truth, but their pursuit of truth exists in many humans in different cultures, and again in your neighborhood as well. Because I don't want to think for you to think that some pursuits are just particular to a culture and others are particular. Like you're going to find people in your neighborhood that's pursuing truth. But this also means that you're going to find other people in your community that, like, honestly, they will care about truth once they get through the month. And so their needs are so different than, finding what's true about life, because there's a deeper need for that individual right now that is, for example, protection or belonging, right? And so something is going to drive these people to look for a solution. Church is just one of them. But when you think of the pursuit of truth, we can all understand it. It doesn't matter what language you speak, where you live. And again, you can go back 6,000 years and you can go in the future 6,000 years. There, as long as they're humans, humans will be pursuing truth. There will be a group of people on earth that will be pursuing truth, just like there will be a group of people pursuing hope. And so you may find that your church, and the word design is very intentional, because I do believe that God has designed you in a certain way, and it's not for your denomination and it's not for your theology. It's designed based on the people that he's seen in that place, in that area, in that time. And so that for me is far more important. Like, who are those that will be on the receiving end of what this church is doing? And that generally attaches to the key human desire that I can satisfy.
When it
Yeah.
comes to figuring out the key human desires that not only we're equipped to serve into,
Yeah.
reach out into, do you find that a lot of church leaders stop too short? Like they stop at surface level, they just want to make it to the end of the day, or they're too sick all the time, or they're frustrated that the school, I get a lot of culture stuff now. They're frustrated that
Yeah.
they don't know what's going on in schools. They're frustrated that the economy's, do you feel like that's not quite the root desire? Do you feel like they're stopping short?
In a way, yes. Now, there are ways that we're stereotyping things, right? And that's normal and it's needed, because we live in a certain world at a certain time. And so our worldview is because of what's around us and how life is around us. And so the busyness and the schedules, and I can't do much with my time or my money, like that's kind of very common for most of us nowadays, independent of where you are, economically even. So I would say like the busy schedules and the overwhelming amount of stuff that we all have in front of us, it's so universal because of how the world is designed. So I think it's easy to just bundle everybody in that same boat, because you think, okay, well, if I'm experiencing this and my cousin is experiencing this and our whole church is experiencing this, then the world is experiencing all of this. True to an extent, but let's look at the design. And so let's go back to the truth approach, right? So a church that is very well designed to I don't like the word satisfy because it feels transactional, but let's just use it for the sake of understanding. So the church that is designed to satisfy a desire of, a pursuit of truth will look very different than a church that is designed to satisfy the pursuit of hope. Can they both speak truth 100%? Can they both pursue truth 100%? But there's going to be one that will come up to the surface more than the other. And what you need to figure out is, okay, where do we fit in? Because it counts the identity of the person you're serving, but it also counts accounts for your identity as a church. And I feel like sometimes where we stop, we just think either of the audience or we just think of ourselves. And this is a two, you got to allow player two to come in the game. So it's a two-player game. In order to communicate, you need two players, one to send the message, one to receive it, and vice versa. And so the message, one to receive it, and vice versa. And so I can't just think of those on the outside and not really look at what am I designed to do, and vice versa. I can only focus on what I do and forget those on the outside. So yeah.
I think that makes total sense. So speaking of the people on the outside,
Yeah.
knowing the desires you're designed to reach and speak into and support and serve and answer, that should influence what you do as a church, including your events, right?
100%. Yes.
This is what we were talking about. We do this research and it just ends in a portfolio on pastor's desk and gets filed away, or it ends in a style guide and it doesn't, like I said, bleed out into ministry. So
Yes.
if we do this research, if we dig deep, how does that influence what we do as a church? Let's just start with events.
Yeah. So I think what's happening is we're finding some things, but then we're mimicking what other churches are doing. And imagine if a church that is focused on hope, we call those catalyst churches, they turn, messes into miracles. Think about you going in, my life is a mess, and they revive the idea of, hey, your life is actually a miracle, or God can operate miracles in your life. This is what we call a catalyst church. Just the name. Okay. So it's nothing to do with anything else. And then we have what we call a teacher church. Yeah. And this is for the pursuit of truth. So if some people may leave a catalyst church and they will say things like, they were not feeding me enough. Have you ever heard that? Like some churches have probably heard this before. And so this is because there's a pursuit of truth that this church in particular, it's not that they're not teaching truth, but their expression of church is probably focused on other things like, hey, our community is really like they're just looking for hope. And so we're doing something a little bit different than just the pursuit of truth. Now, if you put these two together, I believe that there's 12 archetypes for churches. This is just two of them. But when I think of a teacher church that is focused on the truth, a good example of this is Tim Keller's church. The way they set up the auditorium is more like a lecture, so there's a visual, even a distribution of space that is done in a way to facilitate the learning. What I would do for that one, Bible studies. I would do events that have to do with getting really deep in scripture and, inviting Bible scholars and doing things that are more towards that area. And if you think of a church like Tim Keller's doing this kind of stuff, you're like, oh yeah, great. That's awesome. Like it feels like it fits in a way because they're living out the personality and what they're designed to do as a church. And then when you think of a catalyst church, we're talking, for example, of, Louis Giglio in Atlanta. And those are two different pastors, independent of theology. Okay, so we're not touching on the theology of each one of them. We're simply talking about the way they're expressing their church. Now, I'm talking about really big churches. These archetypes exist at any level. So you can be a church of 5, of 10, of 20, and you can still be an example of a catalyst church or a teacher church and others as well. So now what happens with what you're describing before is sometimes we get to the point of doing that research, finding some things, but then in execution, we just look at somebody else. And so instead of looking at those that match the archetype that I have as a church, that match the personality that I have as a church, I'm matching with somebody else that doesn't fit. And so then you have this very disconnected, and you wonder, like, why did it work for them and didn't work for us? Or you wonder why people come to your church and then they leave because you're promising one thing, but then you're giving them something else when they come. And think of that desire as the driver. And you know what? I ask a fun question to my team today. We have a team of 10 and they're all in different countries. And I said, out of all of these key human desires, which one is leading you to your church? Like, why are you going to your church? You know, which one is being satisfied? And some people are like, well, it was belonging, it was connection, it was truth, it was revelation. So it was interesting to see, like, they recognize that, you know, we are also going to church for a reason. So think about your pastor, think about your executive pastor, think about your ministry leader. Like, why are they coming to this church? What is the key human desire that says, I want to be here? You know what I mean?
Find that that causes friction if like we get like some people will come into a church and they'll start trying to change it like their old church.
Yes.
We've dealt, well, every pastor has to deal with that, right? Someone will join the church and it's like, hey, now that I'm here, blah, blah, blah. And pastor's like, no, dude. Do you find that on a leadership side, that some church leaders are just naturally better equipped to serve in, for example, a catalyst church versus a teacher church, and they have struggles if they are in a teacher church?
Yes, those struggles are real, huh? Talk about a cliche, but yes. So what happens is, and here's what you will see. You will see, for example, a leadership team that is united under one of these key human desires, and then you will see a new leader come in with a completely different one. Is that problematic? Not necessarily, because you can be unified at this stage as well, as long as you know what you're doing. Because if you realize, hey, this is the vision, this is what I think we're designed to do, then you can get people to align with that. And remember, churches can and should pivot. So it's not like you have to stay the same all the time. But when we find that these, and I can give you so many examples where we will run the same type of questions. We have a questionnaire that we ask people that kind of gives us a deeper understanding of the personality. And so once we have one leader do it, and then the team, if they do it separately, sometimes we get different results. And so I'm like, you guys are navigating the same ship in different directions. Yeah. And so there's naturally going to be some friction there, or sometimes it's not friction in a negative way as much as it is, we're just not getting out of the same spot we've been for the last 3-4 years. And so there seems to be no momentum. And imagine if everybody knows, what are they designed to do as a church, and take away, like, your message is not going to change. Okay. The gospel is not going to change. This has just to do with the expression of how this church operates. Some churches will operate in homes, for example, because what they pursue, we normally call these the partner churches. It's like, I believe there's friend churches and partner churches. You can have 100 friends, but you only call 3 of them at 2 a.m. Okay. 2 a.m, partner church. These are the people that are like deeper life done together. You know them really well. It's life groups. It's like there's a lot of doing life together and discipling together, but you don't do it with 1,000 people. And so they tend to be smaller and operate in different shapes because of the nature of what they're doing. Now, when you think of a friend church, this is the church that is like, this is the person that will go with you for coffee. And there's still a relationship there. There's still trust. You still like the person. You love to be a part of their lives. And you need that person in your life. And maybe you need 100 of those in your life. Yeah. And so this is a different scenario altogether. A church that is a friend church is one of the most common we see in the US, for example. Yeah.
Sounds very familiar. Sounds very much like the Gen Z type church, where there's a big shift in the
Oh,
way
yeah.
that younger people volunteer. They don't just show up to volunteer somewhere, they will volunteer as a group. And so
Oh,
it's not a
yeah.
matter of getting 13 individuals to volunteer. It's a matter of who's the one that can get their 12 other friends to
Get the
volunteer. And
group.
then you just jump from one volunteer to 13. There's no in between. And
Yeah.
so I could definitely see that. And I could see the older generational churches that are very disciplined, much more into their routine, and much more, I'm going to be here, whether there's 7 of us or 70 of us. And
Yeah.
it can be hard then for a friend church type person. I'm not saying that it's exclusive, but it can be hard for them to come in and like, why isn't everyone's doing their own thing. Everyone's
Yeah.
taking their own test. Like, this is supposed to be, I thought this was a group project. And
Yes.
I think that's why so many people get burned out, is because we think that our church is just like every other church. And so they come, they try, and they leave, and they don't come back, and they don't go to any
Yeah.
church because they think just every church is like that.
Yeah, yeah. And then, I mean, just going back to the other example. So I told you how some people may say, hey, they're not feeding me over here. The opposite can also be true. You can go to a teacher church and be like, oh, they're lifeless over there. They just talk
Yeah,
about knowledge. And that's not the reality. But that's because this person in particular has a different need that is not necessarily satisfied with just more knowledge of the Bible. You know what I mean?
totally
So,
off track.
yeah.
Me and Bridget are definitely, my wife, definitely that way. During an interim period, we would have a seminary professor come and preach. I loved him. And my wife couldn't stand him because he was very lectionary in the way he
Yeah.
presented, which I was able to follow. And I really felt
Yeah.
like, okay, God is speaking to me in this because there's so much more understanding there. And my wife is like,
Yes.
this is like taking another class. She's already been in school for 6 years. She doesn't want another school on
Right,
Sunday.
right, right. And
And
this gives us
yeah,
a little bit of peace about how other churches are demonstrating the gospel, because we need to understand that it's not an expression of faith that is correct and the others are incorrect. Is that God needs those other desires to be satisfied, because some people will come to faith because they found belonging. Some people will come to faith because they found truth. Some people because they found uh, honestly just protection. Like there was a church that cared for them. We're talking about the orphan and the homeless, you know what I mean? So you have a group of people with different needs, and we can't expect everybody to be just this cookie cutter, like everybody comes to know the gospel the same. I used to be that person. I felt like if I heard it and I understood it, you need to hear it and understand it the same way I did. And I was so annoyed. Like that was the real word. I was so annoyed how people couldn't see what I could see. But that's because the way their hearts are touched by God is different. I mean, we all know stories of people that come to faith through dreams or reading scripture or looking at nature. I was like, I can go to a mountain and let me tell you what, I'm not thinking about God. I'm just like, let's get me out of here. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's beautiful and all of that, but I don't have that spiritual experience that many people will have when they're just in, all I'm thinking is how long is it going to take me to get to my car. So, we have to remember we're humans. Again, it goes back to humanizing the people that you're serving. They have different needs and we can serve them.
so it
But
sounds like if we don't understand our design and the desires of the people we're called to serve, and that God's going to call to him through your church, it sounds like it's like my best buddy buys his wife a vacuum and she's so excited. It's the best top of the line. It's a shark. Oh my gosh. And I'm like, great idea. And I buy my wife a vacuum for Valentine's Day. And she's like, you got me a vacuum for
yeah,
Valentine's? Like, well, he loved it, but that's
right.
obviously not the kind of
Yeah.
gift that she would want. I'm just showing my deafness really to what
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
wife wants and desires. So in the same way, going back to the events, how do
Yeah.
we is there a certain set of questions we should ask ourselves or things to keep in mind? Like if we, okay, what is hurting our community? Who are we best
Yes.
equipped to serve or designed to serve? How do you audit that
Yeah.
and come to a conclusion of what kind of events you should look at having?
Yeah. So I
And
like
not consumption promotional events. I'm talking like ministry
no.
events too.
Exactly. Yeah. So I like to start with, we actually have a quiz with questions that people will answer that will give us awareness of the archetype. Yeah. So these series of questions are basically, they're just guiding us in understanding what's at the core. And so we have those mapped out to these 12 archetypes that I was telling you about. And so at the end of the day, you need to think, when I'm importing from someone else, it's a hand me down. It will never look like it fits me. And so now there's nothing against learning from others. I think the church should be the most collaborative thing in the planet, but we need to learn ideas and see how they apply to what we're doing. And so when you think of let's say, for example, again, hope, what kind of events could I create that would answer the idea of hope? If I'm thinking of belonging, go do a block party. Like you don't have to worry about doing a 6-week Bible study. Not that you can't do those, but your focus can be on something a little bit different. If you're trying to, one of the archetypes that we have identified is, we call them pioneers. So think about a church that is creating something that didn't exist before for the sake of opening doors for somebody that wouldn't naturally go to church. So a great example we have of that is Cast Member Church, and you met Stephen in person. before. So his church is just for cast members at Disney, right? So he was the pioneer in creating a space that just serves that community, and it serves them from Disney. They're right there where they work. We've heard of triple X churches in Las Vegas that would serve prostitutes, and so you can think of you have to start with people before you start with the event, before you start with the ministry. And I see churches sometimes doing 20 things, and in reality, all they needed to do was one or two. Yeah. And so these 20 things don't match how you can serve them. Now, look at your resources, right? So look at and by resources, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about space, people, time. There's a lot of resources that go into serving people well. So do I really need to do VBS this summer? Run it through your team and see, is this an alignment?
That's a heresy question for some
You never
churches.
know. Well, the thing is, sometimes you go into great debt, not just in money. I'm talking about like overdoing your volunteers to create an event that may not be what your community needs. Now, at VBS might be a better example because I know there's a lot of value in it. But think of the events that you're currently doing and compare that with the type of the desire that you think people are coming to your church for. And so if I'm a teacher church, I would definitely invest in anything that has to do with teaching. I would invest in Bible studies, books, have a book like a bookstore at the church that people can actually take books home and bring them, so, or others can actually bring their books that they've read, and you can create this culture of, hey, we're here to help you learn, understand, and then take the truth somewhere else. So, yeah.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
While we're talking about the archetypes, I didn't mean to go this deep into the archetypes, but I'm glad we are. If a church, you had mentioned about a church doing 20 different events and they only needed to do one or two. Do
Yeah.
you find that that's some of the cause of disunity we have in our church? I mean, we already talked about the issues of a traditional service and a modern church kind of comes across as two different types of churches. That's a separate podcast for a separate host. But on an event level, do you find that if we really tone it down to one, two, or three types of events that are focused really around these desires, these needs, these resources, instead of trying to spread ourselves out across 20 different events and every event's led by, I mean, let's be honest, those 20 events are led by the same three people anyways.
Yeah.
Do you find
Yeah.
that helps with some church unity in the way that can manifest itself?
I think so. So you're going to find a few things will happen. So the minute you take an event out or the minute you stop doing something, there's always going to be some voices that will be like, why are we doing that? And all that. But so you have to cast vision for the why. Like you can't just eliminate something. It's like I take a toy away from my kid. Like, the first question he's going to ask me is why? Like, why are you taking my iPad away? Right. And so I think we need to cast vision for the why before we remove stuff. And then we have to identify what is my filter for taking these things out, because it's not just about cutting ministry off. It's about deciding who can we serve well and what are we doing that will serve them well. And we can be wise with our resources as well, because I don't think some churches are being too wise with their resources. And so at this stage, let's say, hey, one of the things we've noticed is that people come to our church for belonging. So we're going to focus on creating events that would increase the sense of belonging, would increase the drive for other people to come and join us because they feel like they can belong. And those events are going to be 1, 2, and 3. That means for the moment, for now, these other events are going to be on standby, or we're going to revisit in 6 months. They don't have to be, like gone forever. I would say just put that in the back burner and say, we're going to, for the next quarter, for the next 6 months, we're going to invest in these 3 and see what happens. Because I feel like when you have, okay, maybe this is not the best example, but I think many of us will recognize what I'm saying. It's like you go to a fine dining versus to a Mexican restaurant. Have you seen the menu in a restaurant, like a Mexican restaurant? I mean, it's page after page. And guess what you do? You always get the fajitas because there's nothing else that you even want to read through and try to understand. And so you have this crazy amount of dishes. I mean, it's like a book, right? What are you doing? You're creating more stress for the kitchen, for the servers, all the extra ingredients that you have to buy. And so try to figure out what is it that this church can do well. And you know what that could potentially do? Maybe it will lead you to partner with somebody, some other church in town for that VBS that you don't have to put together. Maybe you can partner and you can join another church in your area that has the space. You can send some of our volunteers, but now you don't have to worry about space anymore or promotion. You would just join with them and say, hey, our kids are going to VBS here at this church. Look at the level of unity that you can create, not just in your church, but with the churches in your area.
A great example of that is a church from a town I used to live in. It seems counterintuitive, but it worked really well. They did not have a food pantry. They thought they saw value in it. People had tried to start from talking to other church leaders at this church. People wanted to start one, but they looked and said, "We have better." And you would think because it's a larger church, this sounds
Right.
nonsensical, but they said, we don't really have the space for it. We don't want to invest the resources to maintain it. So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is if you want to give to a food pantry, and even if you want to volunteer in a food pantry, there is a church on 31st. They've got a great food pantry. Instead of trying to compete with them on resources, let's feed them
Exactly.
resources. But
Ex-
that church, I'd say the second church on 31st, was about 150, 175 people.
Wow.
If there was a disaster, flooding, tornado, something in the area, the church then on Fifth Street, that was the church that collected everything because they had this huge gym. And
Space.
so they would, all the city would donate clothes, shoes, backpacks, toys, all this stuff because they could house emergency
Yeah.
facilities and resources and stuff, not the church on 31st. And so
Yeah.
they recognized, okay, we don't have the space or the manpower to do something long term, but if there's a flood and our church is on a hill, it's not getting flooded. This is the place
Yes.
that we can host this kind of thing. So it sounds
Yeah.
counterintuitive. Like, why would you do one and not the other? But at the same
Yeah.
time, that smaller church on 31st cannot hold $2 million of canned foods and shoes and toys and backpacks. They
True.
don't have the space for that. So
Yeah.
recognizing your resources, we're just harping on the same thing, but there are real good stories in this just to encourage the listeners or
Yeah.
viewers, like this is being done. This is not the first time it's been done. It may be the first time it's done in your church, but I look at that as permission as, we're not copying what someone else has done, but we're utilizing the same principles and philosophy of what they've done to
Yeah.
better serve and equip our community to receive the gospel. Because it's not about just, I mean, this,
Mhm.
it's not just about let's put some shoes on some kids because their shoes got wet. It's about
Yeah.
let's show Christ's love in this method so we can have an inroad, share the love of Christ and share the gospel as well. So the last thing I
100%.
wanted to talk about is communicating this. So we
Yeah.
know these desires. How do we
Yeah.
communicate it in a way that's meaningful, memorable, and relevant so people don't just say, oh, this church just says they're all about friendship because they want my money, but in a way that the community
Yeah.
actually feels like this church really
Yeah.
does care about me. Because one of the things you
Yeah.
hear me harp on a lot is if you sound like every other church, they're going to judge you like every other church, and they're not
Yeah.
going to any other church. Why would they go to your church? So how do
Yeah.
you take this knowledge of the human desires you're meeting and the events you've created to specifically meet these needs, plan
Yeah.
to get this out in the community and get it memorable?
Yeah. So let's look at the word memorable to begin with. You're basically creating something in the minds of people that they will remember at a later stage, right? So what makes something stay in your mind nowadays is hard because you have a lot of things coming your way. Our brains are exhausted. They don't want to have to filter through stuff. And so there has to be a level of repetition that happens that first of all brings that level of trust, because the things that I see often, naturally your brain will start trusting just because of visibility. Yeah. And so when we think of visibility, we need to decide how we're going to be visible, where we're going to be visible, and how frequently we're going to be visible. So the church cannot control the perception, but you can control these three things: how I'm going to be visible, where I'm going to be visible, and how frequently I'm going to be visible. Those are the three things you can control. And so when I decide on the where I'm going to be visible, if I'm talking about, let's go back to the friend church, which is, again, the sense of belonging, right? The sense of community, the sense of connection. That's kind of what they're creating for the people on the outside. I I need to create, first of all, I think language is very powerful, and we can talk about that very briefly, but the idea of repeating things that people associate with you is what Chick-fil-A has done so successfully. So when you go there and you say thank you, they don't say you're welcome, they say it's my pleasure. And that expression alone is enough to make your mouth water when you hear somebody say that outside of Chick-fil-A. It's like you start thinking of chicken. So there's an association with it's my pleasure to Chick-fil-A naturally, right? So they've used an expression that is very like my kids can say it. My kids do say it. And so it can repeat itself often and easily. This is not your vision statement that nobody knows how to say by heart. And let's be honest, those look good on paper. They generally don't transfer over to activities, the day-to-day, the ministry itself. And so they kind of have this like, it's the back of my mind kind of thing, but they never come to the execution side of things. So when I think of it's my pleasure, that's the kind of expression you need to create for your church. Like, how can we utilize language that is simple, repeatable, short, memorable, that can associate, and this is the key point, it needs to associate with the key human desire you're satisfying. I'll give you one example, okay? There's a church that we're going through discovery with, and the key human desire people go to that church for is for goodness. The idea of like, is there good in life? Like, is God even good? Like, okay, so think about that person that is even doubting that goodness is a thing. And that's the person that would potentially attend this church, okay? And one of we created their movement language, like what they exist for is to revive goodness. Imagine a church that their role, like what they use to filter what they do and what they don't do, is to say, hey, will this event help revive goodness in the life of people? That's what they use. It's like a filtering question. And so if the answer is no, they just don't do it. That's it. It's very simple. So if it doesn't revive goodness in the life of people, it's not an event we have to worry about. They can leave it for another church or maybe for later. So these types of activities, in my opinion, normally go attached to language. Simple, short, repeatable, that again, my kid can say revive goodness. Yeah. So my grandma can say it's not complicated or complex. You know what I mean?
It comes back to like the Gwinnett campaign. At my
Yeah.
my home church,
Or my city, yeah.
at my home church, we had a new pastor, and we would say like, I love this place. Like
Yeah.
anytime it was someone's coming to church, we didn't really use it outside the church, but once they're in the church, it's I
They would
love this
hear it all.
place. Like you would say, I love my home, right? Like I want to go home
Yeah.
because I love my home. I miss my home. I love my family because they're home because I love my home. So there was a lot of repetition there.
Mm.
And I think that's what a lot of church leaders are scared of, is repetition.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
afraid we're going to turn this hard work we've done, it's going to become the 877 cash now of the
Yeah.
city and turn
Yeah.
people away.
Yeah.
Is that a false concern? Is that something we should
Uh,
be aware of?
no, I think you know what happens is like, so I think sometimes when we simplify things, people find it hard to believe that it could be that simple. And so imagine this, like if this group of people that now have this church that I was talking to you about, if let's say in 3 years, they're no longer a church and they're now a Christian organization, they could still be reviving goodness. It's a mission, it's a movement that goes beyond what you're doing right now. If COVID comes again and we're again stuck in the house for 3 months, they can still revive goodness. Yeah. Because it's no longer about the church service on a Sunday or the Wednesday Bible study. Like they can still help people feel like goodness is possible in their lives because we have a good God, independent of where they are and what they're doing. If they go to 20 campuses or if they stay in one, they can still revive goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, you pick your favorite restaurant, with Mexican restaurant, the fine dining restaurant, McDonald's down the street. You don't know their vision statement. You don't know their
Yeah.
mission statement. You don't know their core values, but you see
Yeah.
all of it lived out in the
Yeah.
way that it's presented, right? McDonald's mission statement and Taco Bell mission statement, I use those two examples a lot, totally different. The way they present themselves, McDonald's is for the family on the go. Taco Bell is for the poor college student. You can go to McDonald's as a college student and get a Happy Meal. You can go to Taco Bell as a family. You're not excluding anyone. You're just focusing
Yeah.
on, we got cheap food that's good for kids. And then we've got family meals and Happy Meals that are good for families. We're going to lean into that. And in the same way, you're not competing for someone's hunger like you would be a corporation. We are saying
Yeah.
that God has designed us to reach a certain group of people, and the vision he's given pastor, the mission he's assigned to the church, the values that we hold dear, and make sure everything we do are aligned with. And yes, the human desires that we meet to, that then manifests into For Gwinnett, into I love this place, into Revive Good, into whatever
Yeah.
the outgoing is. Life should little becomes much is one of our clients. So like
Yeah.
it's taking everything and then dumbing it down, so to speak,
Yeah.
simplifying it,
Yeah.
and it almost becomes hard to believe how simple
How simple
it
it is.
it, it
Yeah.
is. And in fact,
Yeah.
if you really get into it and you look at your history, you realize we've been complicating it. I mean,
Yeah.
how many times have
Exactly.
we as pastors and preachers and church leaders, right? The pinch hitter
Yeah.
rule, I call, like, pastor
Yeah.
can preach 10 Sundays and no one moves. And then a guest preacher comes in and everyone's hallelujah coming to the altar. And you're like,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
guy basically, the third grader could have understood that because it was
Yeah.
simple and people
Yeah.
got it. So
Yeah,
I
and
think a lot of
let me
times
add
we
one.
can
Yeah,
get
let
in
me
our
add
own
one
way.
thing very quickly is that your churches are already intuitively doing the archetype that they have. So it's not like you're coming in creating a new one. They're already doing it. I think that once you put a label to it and you give it a name, it becomes easier to understand what to do next. And so the work is simply to get awareness. That's it. You're not building something else that you're not. I feel like every time we tell a church, hey, you're a teacher church or you're a friend church, it just feels like, yeah, that's who we are. It just solidifies what they know deep inside. So there's not a changing of what you're doing as much as it is an awareness. And that is very
If
powerful.
if
Yeah.
a pastor church leader wants to put a name to their ministry, if they want to figure out what kind of desires they really need to speak into and how, where, and how often they should speak into those desires, I would recommend they talk to you. Where can people reach out to you or to continue the conversation or just learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so our website is Word Revolution, word like the word of God, not the world revolution. So WORD, wordrevolution.com. And I'm very active on Facebook. I have a group there as well for accidental church communicators. So that's where we kind of hang out and talk about our struggles trying to communicate with people. But yeah, you'll find me on either one of those platforms.
Perfect. Thank you for being here, Barbara.
Thank you.
It's not about changing who you are, it's about being aware of who you are and knowing who your church is equipped to serve, knowing who God has designed you to reach, to equip, to disciple, to put an identity on it, to put a name to it, to put a slogan to it, even if I can use that language. Not a huge fan of like taglines and slogans, but let's call it like it is, right? It's simplifying who we are, what we identify as serving, right? Every individual Christian has different gifts. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Every church is gifted to serve different kinds of people. That doesn't make one better than the other. And I think when we have an awareness of who we are equipped to serve, it helps us serve better. It helps us communicate better. And it helps people better understand and feel understood by our church when another church could not effectively serve them. Having an identity, knowing your archetype, as Barbara calls it, is just another weapon in our arsenal in the spiritual battle that we face. And having that knowledge, having that awareness, to me, it's a lot like if you've ever done a diet. I'm doing one right now. I wouldn't say it's a diet, but it's more of like a nutrition plan. Knowing what I eat. When I look back and I see, I was eating very dense foods. I wasn't eating a lot, but it was dense enough to where I felt like I wasn't eating that much, but I wasn't losing any weight. Whereas I switched it and I've lost probably another 8 or 9 pounds in about 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, might be longer. And I'm eating more food because I'm aware of eating high protein food that's like volume wise is a great volume for me, but it's not calorically dense. And so I'm eating more and I'm getting more protein, but at the end of the day, I'm getting less calories. And so having that awareness of what I'm eating is moving me towards my goal of staying satiated, getting stronger, getting leaner, and getting healthier. And in the same way, that's kind of like when I talk about awareness, that's just where my mind is at. If you've ever thought about, why am I not losing weight? Why am I feeling like this? Well, maybe just having an awareness of what you're putting in your body is gonna help you figure out what that is. And so if in the same way, let's flip that coin over and look at the church. If you're wondering, why aren't we moving towards this vision that God's given us? Why aren't we making a greater impact? Why aren't people paying attention to us? How can we have such a good location, but people don't know we exist? How can we have been in this community for over 100 years, but people don't know we exist? How come we did these advertisements, these banners, this press release, this announcement, these mailers? People don't know we exist. Having an awareness of who God has designed you to reach and how He's designed you to reach others, who you're gifted to serve, who you're gifted to equip, how your people are equipped and gifted to serve others as well as each other. Knowing that is having an awareness. That awareness brings you, hey, instead of I know what to eat now, it's I know what to do now. And you'll realize that maybe you've got some events that are calorically dense, they're resource intensive, and they're not moving the needle, or they're actually hurting you. So having that awareness can help you strategically plan these events to effectively serve people. And guess what? When you effectively serve people, people come. So you want to talk about church growth, all you got to do is figure out how do we more effectively serve people with the resources and talents and gifts we've been given. God will send people to you that He's calling to Him to be served if we strategically put up the right sail. God's blowing the wind. The wind is blowing. The question is, are we going to put up the right sail? And I would strongly encourage you to connect with Barbara, connect with Word Revolution, do their discovery, connect with us if you want something a little bit more faster, if you want a 90-day plan to double your church guests, to get more young adults into your ministry, to go from where you are now to double in size if you're small enough by Easter, okay? Or if you've got a longer vision, if you've got a 1-year vision and you need the step-by-step clarity to get that done, by all means, reach out to us. Either way, reach out to someone. Stop looking at what should I do, but look at who has done it and can do it again for me. So God bless you all. Leave a review on iTunes, like, subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, Spotify, whatever. There's a place to ask a question. If you're listening to the podcast, I want to get to know you. I want to help you and serve you. I've had several calls since the beginning of the year. We're in February now, from people that have been silently watching in the background, from someone who said his wife showed him our YouTube channel. And I'm very glad that we've been able to bless others through the very technology that we equip your church to use to reach more people. So liking and subscribing, that just tells these platforms this is good stuff. I want more people to see it and to be encouraged by it. So that means the world to me. Like and subscribe, leave a review wherever you are. I don't have next week's show planned, so it will be a surprise. But as always, it will be tailored to help your church reach more people, to become better known in your community. So people will know your church like they know about the local Walmart. They'll know where you are, when you're open, and what to expect when they connect with you. That's what we want. I want you to be the best known in your community. So when people feel that call of God or they enter a new season in life, they don't say, what church should I go to? They'll already know of you. They'll already know how you understand them. And then it's just a matter of, what do I do next? Not, where do I go next? What are my options? It's, I know what I'm doing next. God bless you all, and I'll see you all next week.
That's going to do it for today's episode of the Best Known Church Show with Justin Nava. Be sure to subscribe to stay updated on the latest news, strategies, and resources that you need to reach 10x more people and become the best known in your community. To send us a message or leave a voicemail for Justin to be played on a future show, visit thebestknownchurchshow.com. And if you'd like to work with us so you can focus on your ministry, give us a call at 832-861-7654. Until next time, stay outrageous, unreasonable, and relentless.